All right. Well, we finished up chapter 5 last week. What major world milestone happened at the very end of chapter 5? It was a major first in world history, in fact. We know it was on or about October 10th, 539. Pretty cool. National Coffee Day. No. The fall of the first empire, 539. Babylon fell to who? The Medes and the Persians. And, it's a little, we can kind of address this. I don't know that I have a good answer. I'll tell you what I think. We read here that Darius took over that very night. If you follow any of the writings of Herodotus, the Cyrus cylinder from Cyrus the Great, Cyrus was not the first Cyrus. In fact, there was a history of leaders in the Persian world named Cyrus, but even before this and after this. I'll tell you, I've looked at this as much as I'm interested in classes prior. The Darius, Cyrus, Xerxes names, there's some overlap here. And I don't know how to make really good sense of this except in this context, except to say that either Darius or Cyrus was more like the name of king or emperor in that time, and I don't know which. But if you were to follow this to be a literal interpretation at the end of chapter 5, Darius has to be Cyrus the Great. At least in terms of every other world writing about the fall of the Babylonian Empire. Am I an expert? No. But I don't have a better theory. I haven't seen anything out there that would suggest anything would be wrong with that interpretation. But any thoughts about that? Kind of a hard pill to swallow. If you can get on board with this, Mike Ryan read for us a couple verses in the beginning of Ezra where Cyrus in his first year did what? He started sending people back with all the treasures from the temple, right? And again, if you're doing a very literal reading and interpretation of chapter 5, you could see that was exactly a year later. And we might look at some of that a little more here in a few moments. So now we're into this Medo-Persian portion of world history. Just a quick recap. We've been trying to hit on this every time. The first chapter was written in Hebrew, and then what was the second section of the book written in? Aramaic, and the last part is Hebrew. All right. So we've got 2 more chapters in the Aramaic, and then we'll move into the Hebrew. God rules in the kingdoms of men. How have we seen this played out in the chapters so far? Have we seen this played out?
First chapter, dream in which God is predicting all the next 4 empires and is clearly in control of those empires falling one after the other.
Yep. Anything else strike you here?
The whole Nebuchadnezzar incident, the humbling of him, restoring
Him being a beast of the field for maybe 7 years or 7 months or 7 somethings. Yep. And I kind of like this to work through this. Like in the first chapter, we see God ruling over the bodies of the young men from Israel. In the second chapter, we see what Daniel discussed. In the third chapter, we see God ruling over matter, fire, not consuming the flesh here. In chapter 4, we see God ruling over kingdoms, over people, over someone's mental state. And in this last chapter, in chapter 5, we see God ruling over the entire kingdom, not one person, not one small group of people. He actually is ruling over the entire nation and the emperor or the empire that leads the world stage. And I think that's just, I don't know if that's really intentional, if there's like God proving how he rules over each and every state of different elements and different parts of who we are, but surely you can see how this is a full encompassing idea that any aspect of our lives, God is ruling over, from the least of us to the greatest of us. And I don't think 5 is any different. So at the end of chapter 5, Babylon falls. Darius, I'm going to, again, for the purposes of this class, I'm going to say this is Cyrus the Great, comes on into the rule. And we see here in chapter 6 that I don't know exactly where we are in this timeline, but we know chapter 5 is right here at 539 BC, right? That's when Cyrus the Great takes over, October 10th through November 5th. There's a couple of things that happen. At the end of this night, right, what happens? Daniel gets made third in the kingdom. It's completely pointless because the next day there's a new ruler. And we find that even though this new ruler, this new nation that's leading the people, hasn't had much exposure to Daniel, Daniel very quickly finds himself in the grace of this king. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the text here. But maybe, why don't we read a few verses here to get things started off. Let's read chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials of the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O Darius, live forever." All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors, the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish this injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the injunction. So what do we know that happened in the first year? We've already talked about it, the first year of King Cyrus. He sent people back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple with their wealth. And what we know from the Cyrus cylinder and consequently what Herodotus wrote about this time period is that Cyrus the Great sent all these people back for a reason. And this goes into their religious belief. Some centuries before, there was a great leader, Zoroaster, and his idea of religion, there were several aspects that probably come into play here. And one is you don't want to make mad any god. So you don't know which gods are real, you don't know which gods are just lame idols. So maybe you just try to placate as many as possible at the same time. And the other idea that they had was, it was more like the idea of justice or a balance in the scales. And these were warmongering men, right? They went to war against, going back in time against all kinds of nations to build this empire. We see it even going forward a few stories into Xerxes, they were about to go to war against Greece, right? And the more bad you did and under Zoroaster, the more good you had to do to come into balance there. And so what Cyrus, Cambyses, and some of the subsequent leaders thought in this religion was, yes, I will go and conquer through battle, but then I will be good to the people. And you can actually see this written on the Cyrus cylinder, that he sent refugees back to their homelands throughout the world. This was not just about the Jews and Jerusalem. This was something he was doing at a broad spectrum. And that brings us here to the beginning of the chapter, right? So he's sending all these people out, under my narrative here, if Darius is Cyrus, and he sets up what? Governors, infrastructure. He is building a system of government that will be, pay homage to him, but allow the people to be their own people. And over those 120, who does he put in charge? Daniel's one of them, and Daniel's vying for one of the highest positions. Now, do we know when this is? We talked about chapter 5 being right here at 539. There's no real clear indication. Did I say that? I will say, it seems to me that how would he know to praise the Lord? And we'll see somewhere else here in a little bit that Cyrus does praise the Lord in this first year. And so, Daniel's had to do something to prove himself to this king, right? This didn't happen 2 days after chapter 5. The spirit that shone through to him had to come out somehow. But I also get the feeling, and again, this is Daniel's wild speculation caveat here, a wild speculation that this may be the proving ground for Darius or Cyrus to do the other things we see in 2 Chronicles and in Ezra. Again, you can call me on some speculation there. I don't know where exactly in this area we are. Area doesn't do a good job. But so why would these governors want to be up against Daniel? Pure jealousy? Yeah, so he was about to get second in command, basically. Has Daniel ever had this? We've already said this, but has he ever had this offered before? When he interprets the dream in chapter 2, what does he say? Don't appoint me, appoint Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We see over and over this idea that when the king needs a real interpretation, they call on the wisest, the one full of spirit. And then again, Belshazzar tries to put him as third over the nation at the end of chapter 5. So this is not the first time Daniel's seen this. And these people are jealous. They want the position that Daniel has. What does this this story give us in terms of context as to what they would have done if Daniel was not upstanding? Yeah, they would find what he was doing wrong, go rat him out to the king, make whatever his weakness was known to everyone, and bring him down. But that won't work here. Why?
It says he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him.
Yeah, thank you for reading that. What does that mean he was doing? Probably, 2 big buckets of things he was doing right.
I envision he's reporting the proper taxes. I envision he's collecting, it's if Daniel's an outsider, and if these other two, I just can't help but see modern history, and one political party needs the other party to be able to be a power. So it's just they need each other to be able to keep their power in existence. If there's an odd man out and this odd man out is doing proper, then it potentially exposes their improper deeds and activities.
So is it fair to say he's being a good citizen? I think that's one thing he was doing, right? And how else was he being faithful? Doing a good job, doing his role. Absolutely. Maybe there's 3 big buckets of things he was doing right. But he was also following who? God, right? So he was finding a way to prove himself, make himself valuable in this. And it's very accurate to call this a pagan king. In a pagan king's court, he was finding himself valuable and still staying faithful to God. And a lot of that probably had to do with doing a really good job. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of Jeremiah's letter to the exiles in, I forget the chapter, in Jeremiah, where he says, you're going to be there a while, so seek the welfare of Babylon. Go there and, plant vineyards and build and, don't go there and try to overthrow the government. Go there and serve, actually for the welfare of the place where you are. Daniel's obviously a prime example of that.
Mm-hmm. So he's doing, thank you, I think that's apt. He's doing 3 things really well. He's being a citizen, doing his job, and obeying God. Can they go to the king and say, oh, he's being a bad citizen? No. Can they go and say, oh, he's doing a bad job? No. So what's the only thing they can do to bring him down? Yeah, it's King. Find what King Darius doesn't know he cares about, at least at this point in the text, right? And go after that. And so they resort to going after his faith, his obedience to God. And how did they get to Darius? This is a common trait of every chapter that the king shows throughout the book so far. He has a very big something, no matter who the king is. Ego. And what do? They play to that ego, right? They say, what? Well, not yet, right? They say, how great are you, Darius? You're so great. Live forever. In fact, you're so great what? No one should bow down to anyone but you, right? You are so awesome. Let's go ahead and make this an ordinance. And you can see a king liking this. Yeah, I am pretty good. I would love it to know that no one else bent the knee to any idol except for me for these 30 days. Anywhere in King Darius's mind did he think, oh, what about Daniel? No, I mean, he wasn't going after Daniel, right? And so what was this all about? Him. For Darius, it was all about him, right? For the satraps.
His eagle up.
Yeah. And how did the law come into effect? I think we've addressed this, particularly in chapter 3. But how did the law of the Medes and the Persians come into play here? Yeah, even the king can't undo a law that he signs into existence here. So they knew that if they could feed his ego, they could get him to sign this law, and even if he wanted to do something, he couldn't do anything about it, right? And what's the punishment here? Cast into the den of lions. Yeah, lion food. I like that. All right. Any other thoughts on these first 9 verses here? Mm-hmm.
To be the next guy, second in command. But the way they stand, and I agree with your comment about his ego, Darius's ego for sure. But the way they phrase this is that all the governors of the kingdom and administrators and satraps, so the way they phrase the comment sounds like Daniel's bought into this too. And so if I'm thinking Daniel's going to be the number 2 guy, it's probably pretty important to me that Daniel's on board with this plan. And they made it sound like he was, if I'm reading that correctly. Did you see it the same way?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but clearly they weren't not opposed to some deceit here. But again, once the ego was involved, I think Darius had blinders on, right? That's right. That's right. Very good. Okay. So chapter 6, verse 10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, "O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they answered and said before the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day." Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that is the law of Medes and Persians, that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the lion's den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. All right, so I'm sorry. Sick a month ago, and anyway. Let's think about our story so far. How old was Daniel? My conjecture here is that the 70 years has passed, and he was a teenager in chapter 1, so 85. Has he seen anything? Has he seen God's faithfulness? He knew enough to keep the windows open, yeah. We'll get to that. Taking away my talk track here. No, that's my mother. Sorry. So he had been given a reason to trust, right? Has he seen anybody rescued from something that shouldn't have happened? The furnace, yeah, absolutely. Which is a greater deed? I don't know, but that's pretty awesome to remember. People died throwing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace, and they did not die. Daniel had seen this man go crazy and come back. He'd seen a hand writing on the wall in fire. Very acquainted with angelic deities. Sometimes I feel like it's an angel. Sometimes I don't know if it's something else, but he had seen a lot of really cool, miraculous things here. And here he is, an old man. No offense to you old men, but do old men change their ways very much? Oh, no. For an answer, Albert. People tend to be set in their ways the older they get, right? So he had seen all this weight of evidence, and at this point in his life, are you really thinking Daniel's going to falter here? And I don't know. I think it's interesting to think about all he had seen at this point. And so he goes, and his windows are open. Is he being defiant at this point? No. Why not?
He doesn't care.
He doesn't care?
He's doing what he's done every day for his whole life. What's he being defiant about? This is who he is.
Yeah.
I think he's just, he's an old man. He's probably content with the life he's lived. He knows where he's going when he dies, and he has nothing to lose.
Not being defiant towards God, obviously.
Not towards God, no.
Making the case, yes, being defiant towards at least the law.
How so?
Well, he says when he knew the document had been signed. I take that to mean when he knew it was in effect. Like he
decision.
wasn't. I guess what I mean by that, maybe it's too forceful, is that it wasn't oh my goodness, I didn't even know this was a law. I'm just going to, you know what I mean? It was intentional.
Yeah. What could Daniel have done here that would have been allowed him to be? Remember the things. That's why I had 2 buckets earlier. But the 3 things he was being good at was being a good citizen and being faithful. Is there an option here that he could have kept playing that card? Close the windows, right? Go in the closet, okay? Do we ever close the windows in our lives? No? I think, yeah, maybe sadly. It's interesting, right? Because, yeah, Ian, go ahead.
I would just, I think, I don't know if Jordan said it or not, but I was just thinking, rather than being defiant, there is some essence of defiance here maybe, but I think he just has that boldness that comes from being confident in your faith and, knowing what to expect at the end of his life. He's just being bold. And you asked that question, do we close our windows? Yeah, we do, because we are too scared to be as bold as Daniel and go out into the world and just be rigid, just be a Christian all the time.
Good answer. Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, along the lines of the boldness. I mean, in chapter 1, we had suggested, although I guess it's not 100% clear, but we had suggested in chapter 1 that the decision not to eat the food was not necessarily a decision about, to eat the food would be sinful, but more so that they were making a statement in the best way. They were making a statement that, we're not one of you, right? I think you could say the same thing about chapter 3. It's like you could say, well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have found some way to not technically violate God's law, but not stand out. That kind of thing. That's, to your point, that's often the way we kind of think.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there a way to technically not sin, but still not stand out and draw attention from the world around us? But in all 3 of these cases of defiance, or at least boldly obeying, like part of it, maybe most of it, was no, we're going to show the world who we are. We're not going to hide it. We maybe could, but we're not going to.
Yeah. Is that then to say that it would be wrong to close the window? Let me ask this question. So in chapter 4, what do we see Daniel be? He's very political in a very certain way. Does anybody recall that? There's this. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's right. But he starts off and says, "O king, may this interpretation as dream before your enemies," right? So, and that's not the same as closing a window. My point is, you see Daniel be very intentional about how he does. He did not do this because, and maybe you don't want to use the defiant. Maybe you want to say bold. I like that description a lot. Daniel did this on purpose to make sure everyone knew. He knew how to play the game. He knew how to stay at the head of a pagan kingdom and remain faithful. And he knew when to go in and when not to. Yes. He knew who was going to win. Yeah. He knew the outcome. And that's where the trust comes from. Yeah, Albert.
I think teaching in New Testament, then in Old Testament, we're supposed to respect the authority of the political figures and all. So, I mean, this is at play. This isn't a new lesson. So he's respecting the position. He may not respect the person, but they're in a position of authority, so he is obligated to fulfill.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's what we should be doing today in respect to our leadership.
Like that. Yeah, Doug. Doug
Daniel
first,
is
then
just the ultimate example of a principled person. And it really wouldn't have mattered if the windows would have been closed, because they knew what he was doing at the time he was doing it. And if they'd have said, "Hey, Daniel, you closed the windows, were you praying?" I suspect Daniel would have said, "Yes, I was."
Yeah.
So I think he's trying to show, I'm not going to change because I'm trying to demonstrate that I can be faithful to the king and I can be faithful to God too. He tells Darius, I haven't done anything against you. Right. You're still my king, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rick.
The verse that came to mind in the New Testament, Paul says, avoid the appearance of evil. And if Daniel had closed those doors, people would have assumed, hey, he's complying with the king's command, even though the bad guys probably, as Doug said, would have come after him anyway. But the broader population may have assumed that he was obeying the king's command. And to make sure that that wasn't the interpretation, he left the windows open. That's possibly one reason.
Boldness, right? That's a great answer. Several things have come up here. How are these other governors approaching this situation? Are they happening upon Daniel praying? They met by agreement. They planned to be there at 3 p.m. whenever he was doing this, right? They meant to catch him, and they all showed up. In fact, we read that twice. They meet the king by agreement again. This is all very deliberate. And really, who else would have had a hard time following this edict in the world? Probably not many people, but a follower of Jehovah, right? Any other thoughts here? I guess I wanted to talk about this a little bit. How did Darius feel about Daniel's actions?
It's interesting because the language that the bad guys use, as you mentioned, hey, this Daniel, one of the exiles that came, when clearly Darius knew who Daniel was based on the response that he had. So maybe just another way of trying to incite, bring Daniel down. But clearly it did not have I would assume, it did not have the effect these leaders wanted to have on Darius because of his reaction. So just speculate here, but I wonder if when they saw the king's response, if they started getting maybe a little uneasy about this situation.
Interesting take. Yeah, Ian.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what context, we're missing here. How did they get him to sign this in the first place? Was he inebriated? Did they actually trick him? Was this in a normal sort of council setting and he signed it? Because he knows Daniel really well here. He knows that Daniel has this God that he worships, has worshiped faithfully for his whole life. And then he even says here, may your God whom you serve continually deliver you. Mm-hmm. So I understand the ego is definitely at play here, but I almost feel like he was tricked in some way to sign this, quickly, or maybe he was intoxicated or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trickery played a part in this, if nothing else, manipulation. And they manipulate the law, too, for sure.
I think they played on his ego and got him to do what they wanted him to do. And then once he signed it was too late. Nothing he could do.
And they play that hard, right? You signed it, right? Yeah. You can't do anything about it. They knew this would happen. They knew he would see Daniel, wish he hadn't have done it, but they would have him trapped. They used this law here. We could probably have gone to 2 Chronicles 36 earlier in this lesson and later in this lesson. But it's interesting. I don't think I ever think about going to 2 Chronicles for the times of the exile. But here at the end, we do read about Babylon and how the exile will happen, and 70 days later. And in verse 22 of 36, it actually reads, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Have we ever read that? Over in Ezra chapter 1, the first year when he sends everyone back, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, Daniel mentioned that, might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up. So this is the same edict we read about in Ezra chapter 1. But what does this speak to? There's something here that I don't think we've gotten in any other context. So it's a very intimate familiarity with what? We see him say something here that we don't see him say in Daniel or in Ezra about the Lord, right? the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me. Have we seen much of this in the book of Daniel at all? And this is the first year. Now, how much did it take for Nebuchadnezzar? Quite a bit of time, quite a bit of stories, quite a bit of miracles. He came there, right? Right, Albert? He wrote that beautiful passage of the Lord of Lords and those things there in chapter 4. You've convinced me that was a conclusion at the beginning of that chapter. But here in his first year, he comes to this conclusion, so much so that he says, so how does he know this God? How does he know that this God is so powerful? Is he a Jew? Is he... Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he has some familiarity with Daniel. Is there any other way to look at this? In the first year, if we match all this up, to being within 12 months of each other, and we go back and look at our text here, Ian mentioned it. How did he know to give God this credit?
Those stories would have been passed on. This wasn't all that far away. This is, 1 or 2 generations of storytelling here that get to the king, and he knows what this God has done. Whether he believes personally that's the only God, he knows, he's heard stories from people who are still living about what this God can do.
What does it say at the beginning of why Daniel was in such a high place? He had what? He had a great spirit within him. And we've read this before, right? And like I said, could we have talked about this a little later in this context? Maybe. But it's clear in his response to Daniel that he knew who Daniel's God was, and he knew what Daniel's God could do. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Belshazzar was not given the opportunity to return the people to Jerusalem, and in the first year of King Cyrus, that does happen, right? And I can't, there's no text that you can read to do that, but I think if you understand this context here and what King Cyrus is able to feel within 1 year of knowing Daniel, you see that there was a big influence in his life. Yeah, Albert.
Yeah. Verse 16 strikes me where he's, your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. I just get this emotional, or the sense of an emotional conversation where he's looking at Daniel and just going, I really don't want to do this. I'm bound to do this. He's speaking with his body language, but he just shares with him, your God who you serve, who I see you constantly serve, save you. And then you see his restless night. You see him fasting. I am curious, and it's a rabbit hole. Who is he praying to? Is he praying to Daniel's God? Please look out for him, protect him. We don't know, and I don't want to go down that path. But I see a very close relationship, and it's an encouragement to me, or it's an admonishment or command to me. Am I standing out in my community to where people see God and see God living in me and my decision making and my behavior, my characteristics, my mannerisms, and all? And I just get a very personal sense in these verses 16 through 18 or so.
I think Darius had a heart that was open, and I don't know that I've really built this case well. What I've been trying to build up to is the fact that Daniel's faithfulness may have had a direct part in the ability of the Jewish people to fulfill God's prophecy of returning after 70 years. I've kind of gone a little bit in a wiggle worm about getting to that point, but is that clear? Any thoughts or questions about that? Yeah, Daniel.
Maybe one more piece of the puzzle. It mentions in chapter 6 here that he opened his windows, was praying towards Jerusalem. That actually connects back to at the dedication of the temple in 1 Kings 8. Solomon says, if and when the time comes that the people sin so much that you take them into the land of their enemies, when they turn their face towards this spot and pray, please have mercy on them and bring them back. And so, again, that's not proof, but it would suggest that, that's why Daniel's praying towards Jerusalem. And we do see him in chapter 9. We actually have recorded his prayer when he realizes, hey, it's time for the people to go back, and he prays to God asking that to happen. So that would kind of be a piece of the puzzle, like to show he's praying towards Jerusalem because the people haven't gone back yet. He's praying, seeking God's favor continually day after day. And then, the next domino to fall is Cyrus seeing Daniel's faithfulness, in your theory here, which I like, seeing that faithfulness, and then that, that being the means by which God stirs him up to send the Jewish people back in answer to the prayer that Daniel was praying every day.
I like that. I hadn't connected that in. Very good. Any other thoughts? Oh, yep.
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe the lesson is that for all of us is that, when we are faithful and doing our best to serve God, what we're doing is we're connecting with God's will. And so you can see this in the book of Daniel and all of the Old Testament. He's bringing his will to pass regardless of what men do. But when we are faithful to him, then we're sort of cooperating with him, and he's finding a way to weave us into the pattern of his will. So,
Agents for his will,
right,
for sure. Yeah. All right. We've got a few minutes left. Kyrie, any other thoughts before we wrap this up? All right. So he's been thrown in the lion's den, verse 19. Then at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of the lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them, broke all their bones into pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. How concerned was Darius in these last few verses? Very, right? At the break of day, he runs out, right? No breakfast, no coffee. Maybe he had coffee. I'd have coffee. No, but he's so concerned that the first thing he does is rush. And how does he ask? He asks expectantly, right? He expects that at least there's a chance that this God has saved him. Could Darius have ever seen anything like this before? Probably not. I can't say absolutely not. Maybe there was other stories. But he asks expectantly. He already trusts God to some extent. He trusts that Daniel trusts in his God. Of course, Daniel's okay. And how does Daniel respond to the king? Is he mad? How dare you? You were tricked. You fool. O king, live forever. Here he is, filling filling his good natured roles in on all accounts again, right? O King, live forever. My God has saved me. I have done right by him, and I've done right by you. I've not done you any wrong. And we've kind of talked through this already, but how does Darius respond to the Lord here? He makes a decree, right? He proclaims God. He proclaims his greatness and all that he's done, and gives him lots of praise. So, the miracle here, is that really the story? We didn't spend much of our time on the angel and the salvation here. What is the story? Is it that? It is when you're teaching a 4-year-old, for sure. But what's the real story here? Daniel's trust, right? Isn't that really at the bottom of all of this? Man, what a cool miracle, right? We can't not stop and acknowledge how awesome that is. But I think at the end of the day, this chapter is really about Daniel's trust and God's faithfulness in turn. And in a very, very perilous time. Any other thoughts? I know we're already over here. All right, well, thanks for your time, and we'll get on to chapter 7 next week.